Dear friends, welcome to our channel. We are very happy to share with you different stories about love and betrayal from around the world. So let's begin today's story journey. If you go back to that old man, you're never coming back. Julia glared at Mark, her eyes flashing with contempt and anger he had never seen before. Then, she slowly raised her right hand and gave him the middle finger. At that moment, 10 years of marriage turned to ashes in Mark's mind. He calmly removed his wedding ring and placed it on the dining table. The sound of metal hitting the wooden surface was especially crisp in the quiet room. "So, that's it then," Mark said, his voice low and firm. Barcelona's sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust floating in the air. This home they had built together had now become a witness to the grave of their love. 10 years ago, Mark met Julia at an architectural design exhibition. At that time, he had just established his own architectural firm, and she was a newly appointed curator at a well-known gallery. "Your design concept is very interesting," Julia said, stopping at his booth and gently tracing the lines of his model. The fusion of classical and modern, like a conversation across time and space. Mark was attracted by her unique insight into design, and even more moved by her bright eyes and confident demeanor. They exchanged contact information, had dinner together a week later, began living together after 3 months, and married after a year. For the first 5 years after marriage, their life was like a perfect blueprint. Mark's architectural firm grew steadily, securing several important urban renewal projects. Julia's influence in Barcelona's art world also continued to rise, as she curated several highly acclaimed exhibitions. They bought an apartment with a terrace in the city, and often invited friends over for gatherings on weekends, sharing food, art, and life. Of course, not everything was perfect. Mark's architectural philosophy, which emphasized environmental protection and social responsibility, sometimes led him to refuse high-profit projects with significant environmental impact, occasionally causing Julia's dissatisfaction. "We need to consider the future," Mark would patiently explain. "Architecture doesn't just serve the present. It's for future generations too." Julia, on the other hand, focused more on the current quality of life, believing Mark was sometimes too idealistic. Despite this, they still respected each other's values and choices. The change began in the 6th year. Julia was promoted to artistic director of the gallery, and her work pressure increased dramatically. At the same time, she seemed anxious about her approaching 40th birthday. Mark noticed she began frequently changing hairstyles and clothing styles, with a noticeable increase in selfies on her Instagram. She started attending more industry parties and coming home later and later. "I just want to stay vibrant," Julia explained when Mark asked about her changes. "That's how the art world is. If you look outdated, people will think your vision is outdated too." There was a hint of defensiveness in her tone, her eyes flickered slightly, and Mark vaguely felt something was wrong, but he chose to trust his wife. Mark accepted this explanation and focused on his own career. He was participating in a socially significant affordable housing project, hoping to provide dignified living environments for low-income families in the city. This project consumed a lot of his time and energy, but he believed it was worth it. Whenever he returned home, Mark would always try to share his day with Julia and care about her work and feelings. He would return home on time, make time to accompany her on weekends, and even learn to cook several dishes she liked. However, he found Julia increasingly distracted, less interested in his sharing, and perfunctory to his care. It was at this time that Daniel entered their lives. Daniel was a rising mixed-media artist whose work combined installations, digital art, and traditional painting. Julia decided to curate a solo exhibition for him, believing it would be an innovative attempt for the gallery. "His work has a special tension," Julia excitedly told Mark when introducing Daniel's art. Her eyes sparkled with a brightness Mark hadn't seen in a long time. "Breaking boundaries, challenging the audience's perception. I think this exhibition will be the highlight of the year." Mark's initial impression of Daniel was quite good. During a dinner the three of them shared, Daniel was witty, knowledgeable, and had some understanding of architecture. He was a few years younger than Mark and Julia, with eyes that sparkled with ambition and a thirst for the future. When he talked about art, he was full of passion, sometimes eloquent, sometimes bowing his head in thought. This contradictory charm seemed particularly attractive to Julia. "Your firm's philosophy is quite avant-garde," Daniel said to Mark. Combining sustainable development with humanistic care is rare in today's architectural world. Mark thanked him for his evaluation, but inwardly felt a slight unease. Daniel's words seemed too smooth, and something seemed hidden behind his smile. Especially when he talked about his creative concepts. Mark noticed that some viewpoints were strikingly similar to other artists' works, but he didn't point this out. "Your home has good taste," Daniel commented as dinner ended, looking around. "But it lacks some elements that break conventions. Perhaps it needs some bolder works." Julia immediately agreed. "Yes, I've always felt that way." Mark likes everything neat and orderly, but art needs some chaos, some struggle. Mark noticed that Julia didn't look him in the eye when saying these words, but rather gave Daniel a knowing glance. In the following months, Julia invested an unusually large amount of time in Daniel's exhibition. She often returned home late at night, explaining that she needed to handle various exhibition details. Mark respected her work and didn't interfere too much, but he noticed that Julia began to show impatience with family life. "Do we really need to watch movies every Friday?" Julia complained one night when Mark suggested their usual movie night. "It feels like our life is too routine, like a rehearsed play where every detail is predictable." Mark felt confused but didn't argue. He suggested they could try new activities, perhaps dancing or hiking. Julia half-heartedly agreed, but then made excuses for work during the next few weekends. "Daniel needs me," she would explain. "This is a critical moment in my career." Mark tried to understand, but his inner sense of unease grew stronger. He began to notice that Julia smiled at her phone more frequently, would find excuses to leave the room to take calls, and always returned distracted. The revelation of truth came from a coincidence. One of Mark's clients was a restaurant owner, and when Mark went to his restaurant to discuss renovation plans, he saw Julia and Daniel sitting in a corner through the window. This wouldn't have been suspicious, but then he saw Daniel's hand cover Julia's, and Julia didn't pull away, instead smiling and leaning closer to Daniel. When Daniel lightly kissed her at the corner of her mouth, Mark felt dizzy. That image pierced Mark's heart like a sharp blade. He didn't rush in to confront them, but quietly left, deciding to gather more evidence before deciding what to do. He needed to make sure this wasn't a misunderstanding, and he also needed to give himself time to think about how to respond. Over the next week, Mark noticed Julia's behavior patterns. She always placed her phone screen down, took her phone into the bathroom when showering, and often got up late at night, claiming insomnia, but would be whispering on the balcony. Once, Mark heard her softly say, "I miss you too." "No, he doesn't know. Soon, I promise." These signs all pointed to a heartbreaking truth. Mark chose a legal and reasonable way to verify his suspicions. He didn't snoop through Julia's phone, but checked the activity records of their shared cloud account and found a large number of photo exchanges between Julia and Daniel, some of which clearly exceeded the boundaries of a professional relationship. The most decisive evidence came from their family credit card statement, showing that Julia had made multiple midday expenses at a hotel on the other side of the city on workdays. These discoveries made Mark feel a pain in his chest, as if someone was constantly squeezing his heart. 10 years of trust, 10 years of commitment, collapsed overnight. He sat alone in his office for an entire afternoon, contemplating how to face this reality. After confirming the betrayal, Mark didn't immediately explode. He contacted his lawyer friend Elena to consult about divorce matters while organizing evidence. "Are you sure?" Elena asked. "Maybe there's room for reconciliation?" Mark just shook his head. Betrayal isn't a momentary impulse, but a series of decisions. Each time, she chose deception. A week later, Julia announced that Daniel's exhibition had been a huge success, and she planned to accompany Daniel to an art fair in Madrid for a week. "This is important for my career development," Julia said, with a tone that brooked no refusal. The gallery board values this collaboration highly. Daniel's work has already attracted the attention of several important collectors. As she packed, she excitedly talked about Madrid's art atmosphere and the opportunities this fair might bring. Mark stood in the bedroom doorway, silently watching her place carefully selected clothes into her suitcase, including a black silk nightgown he had never seen before. Mark nodded in agreement, but as Julia packed her luggage, he calmly said, "If you go, our marriage is over." Julia was stunned, then glared at Mark. "Are you threatening me? Because of my work?" Her voice rose in shock. Not because of work. Mark's voice was unusually calm. Because of your relationship with Daniel. I already know. Julia first denied it, then argued it was just a work relationship, and finally, when Mark presented the evidence, her attitude suddenly changed. So what? Julia countered, her eyes flashing with defiance. Daniel makes me feel alive, and you? You only care about your architecture and your idealism. What I need is passion, to be appreciated. Daniel understands my desire for art, understands the challenges and stimulation I need. So you chose betrayal instead of communication? Mark asked, his voice revealing undisguised hurt. This isn't betrayal. This is my way of finding myself. Julia defended, her voice trembling. Daniel understands art, understands my value. And you're too stable, too predictable. Our life is like a straight line, without ups and downs, without surprises. I thought that's what marriage was, Mark said with a bitter smile. Supporting each other, growing together. If you weren't happy, we could have found solutions together. But deception isn't the solution, Julia. It was at this moment that Julia said those words. If you insist on this, then so be it. Daniel has already invited me to live with him. He says together we can create a legend in art history. He understands better than you what I need, what I appreciate. Then came that middle finger, that ring being placed down, and the end of a 10-year marriage. The divorce proceedings began quickly. Mark insisted on a fair division of property, without asking for any compensation, even though his lawyer told him Julia's infidelity might give him an advantage in property division. I just want to end this, Mark told his lawyer. Clean and simple. I don't want to argue in court about who was right or wrong, nor do I want to involve more people in this painful process. During the divorce proceedings, Mark heard from mutual friends that Julia had indeed moved in with Daniel. The gallery accepted her resignation, as she decided to fully support Daniel's art career, even investing her own savings to help Daniel establish an independent studio. She's become a completely different person, their mutual friend Sophia told Mark during a coffee date. The way she talks, her dressing style, even her views on art have changed. It's like she's imitating Daniel, losing herself. Mark didn't make any statements about the divorce on social media, but when friends asked, he chose to be honest. We separated because of differences in values. She chose another path. Most friends understood and supported Mark, while a few remained neutral. To Mark's surprise, several of Julia's close friends privately contacted him, expressing their incomprehension and concern about her decision. There's something strange about Daniel, Julia's college friend Lisa told Mark. He always seems to be looking for people he can use, rather than equal partners. I'm worried Julia will end up getting hurt. Mark thanked her for her concern, but said it was no longer something he could intervene in. Julia made her own choices, and now she needs to be responsible for them. The day the divorce proceedings were completed, Mark walked out of the court alone. Barcelona's sunlight was still bright, the streets still bustling. He took a deep breath and felt a strange relief. The pain of betrayal was still there, but he knew he had made the right decision. 10 years of memories wouldn't disappear because of signing a document, but at least he no longer had to endure lies and deception. 6 months after the divorce, Mark completely immersed himself in work. His affordable housing project received high praise from the city government and attracted more similar commissions. He moved out of their original apartment and rented a small apartment on the other side of the city, starting a new life. This apartment was much smaller than their previous home, but it had a spacious balcony overlooking the city. Mark planted various plants on the balcony, creating a small urban garden. In the evenings, he would read or sketch there, occasionally sharing a bottle of wine with his neighbor Gabriel, a retired music teacher whose piano playing had become a comfort during Mark's lowest times. Losing love isn't the end of the world, Gabriel once told Mark, but forever believing in lies is. Mark began to cultivate new hobbies and habits. He joined an urban hiking group, exploring corners of Barcelona every Sunday morning, took cooking classes, learning how to prepare healthy meals for himself, and even signed up for a half marathon, starting to jog every morning. His life gradually found a new rhythm and meaning. At work, Mark began collaborating with a landscape designer named Sophie, who focused on creating sustainable urban green spaces, highly compatible with Mark's architectural philosophy. A community park project they jointly designed attracted media attention and they began to be invited to various professional forums and lectures. Sophie was intelligent, independent, and full of energy, but Mark carefully maintained a professional distance, despite noticing colleagues often hinting at the chemistry between them. "I'm not ready yet," Mark honestly answered when a friend asked about his relationship with Sophie. "And I'm not sure if I can fully invest in a relationship again. Once trust is broken, it's hard to rebuild." Meanwhile, Julia and Daniel's artistic legend seemed to be taking off smoothly. On social media, they frequently posted photos of collaborative projects and their loving life together. Julia's style had completely changed, adopting a more avant-garde look, with her hair color changing from natural brown to eye-catching platinum blonde. Daniel's personal brand rapidly expanded under Julia's promotion. They jointly established an art studio and began accepting high-end commissions. "Tonight is the opening night of Daniel's solo exhibition," Julia wrote on Instagram, with a photo of her and Daniel in their studio. "Watching his dreams come true makes me incredibly proud. This is just the beginning of our artistic journey. Hashtag art without boundaries, hashtag true love." In the photo, Julia's smile was bright, but Mark noticed her eyes seemed somewhat tired. Daniel stood behind her, one arm around her waist, the other pointing to his work, with an expression of triumphant pride. "The two of them are like a rising new star," a mutual friend commented during a chance encounter with Mark, his tone hesitant, uncertain whether he should mention the topic. Mark just smiled faintly. "I hope they're happy." But internally, he still couldn't completely let go of the pain of betrayal. Not because he still loved Julia, but because the betrayal itself had struck at his values. "You really don't hate her?" the friend asked in surprise. Mark shook his head. "Hatred requires energy, and I want to use my energy on more valuable things now." A year later, the turning point began to appear. First, Daniel's artwork came under questioning. Carlos, a senior art critic, pointed out in a sharp review that Daniel's work had striking similarities to the works of a little-known Eastern European artist, Miroslav, from 10 years ago. "This level of similarity goes beyond being influenced," Carlos wrote. "The detail handling, thematic development, and even specific color combinations all show that this is not coincidence, but deliberate imitation, even plagiarism." This review sparked heated discussion in the art world, and more people began to dig into Daniel's creative journey, discovering that his innovative works had actually borrowed concepts from multiple artists, just disguised through mixed media. "This isn't borrowing, this is plagiarism," Carlos bluntly said in a television interview. "His success is built on deception, just like his private life." The last sentence caught media attention, and soon, Julia and Daniel's relationship became a public topic. Someone revealed that Daniel had repeatedly maintained intimate relationships with other women in the art world behind Julia's back, using them to expand his network and resources. A young art dealer named Maria publicly stated that Daniel had sent her flirtatious messages and repeatedly tried to meet her alone while dating Julia. He said Julia was just a stepping stone for his career development, Maria told an art magazine. He said he needed someone to open the doors of the art world for him, and Julia had resources and connections. Julia initially firmly defended Daniel, posting a long text on social media. Art itself is a tribute to and restructuring of predecessors. Those accusations are just jealousy and malice. Daniel's talent is unparalleled. He's just paying tribute to art masters in his own way. She even mobilized her accumulated connections in the art world, trying to quell the storm. However, when multiple women stood up to confirm their relationships with Daniel, Julia had to face reality. Especially when a young female artist publicly revealed Daniel's flirtatious messages, in which he referred to Julia as just a stepping stone for his career and planned to end the relationship at an appropriate time. He said Julia had connections and funds, but was past her prime, the female artist recalled in an interview. He needed her to help establish his reputation, and afterward would look for a younger, more valuable partner. He even showed me photos of several candidates he considered suitable. These words hit Julia's heart like a heavy punch. She disappeared from social media for a week, and when she reappeared, she posted a brief statement. "I need time to think and heal. Please respect my privacy." But she still stood by Daniel, albeit less firmly. Meanwhile, Daniel's art career rapidly collapsed. Several planned major exhibitions were canceled, and collectors began questioning the true value and originality of his works. Worse, a former assistant revealed Daniel's creative process, including how he systematically studied works of unknown artists and then repackaged them under his own name. He had a special notebook recording works from various small galleries and emerging market artists, the assistant said. He would select works with potential but low recognition for transformation, ensuring the original creators were unlikely to discover or protest. Daniel tried to counterattack, claiming he was being persecuted, but the evidence was conclusive. Eventually, he lost control in an interview while drunk, yelling at the reporter, "All artists do this. I just wasn't cautious enough. Those who accuse me, what value do their works have? At least I let people see beauty." This video spread rapidly online, becoming the end of his art career. Subsequently, many art world figures began to boycott his work, and galleries canceled their collaborations with him. Daniel's true face gradually emerged. He not only plagiarized in art, but was also full of deception in life. Reports said he also had substantial debts and had been maintaining a glossy surface appearance with Julia's funds and reputation. Julia's career also suffered collateral damage. All the professional endorsements she had made for Daniel now became evidence questioning her vision and professional ability. More fatally, gallery owners began investigating other artists she promoted during her tenure and found that several also had similar plagiarism suspicions. "This can't just be coincidence," a collector questioned in an interview. "She's either incompetent or complicit. Either way, it has caused damage to the art world." Moreover, Julia and Daniel's joint studio also fell into financial crisis. As commissions decreased, the studio began laying off staff. Daniel reportedly behaved extremely coldly during this process, even refusing to pay employees severance. Julia tried to salvage the situation but found the studio's accounts had been almost emptied. Daniel had transferred most of the funds when the storm began. In their private life, Julia and Daniel's relationship also took a sharp downer. Daniel began showing indifference and even contempt towards Julia in public. Witnesses said that at a private party, Daniel publicly accused Julia of ruining his career, saying if it weren't for her excessive interference, his work wouldn't have been scrutinized so severely. "This isn't my fault," Julia countered at the party, her voice hurt. "I've always fully supported you, even sacrificing my own career. Your support is pushing me into the spotlight for judgment." Daniel mocked. "If you really understood art, you'd know how to protect artists, not expose them to hostile gazes." At the height of the storm, Julia contacted Mark. "Can I see you?" she wrote in a text message. "I need some advice." Mark hesitated for a long time before finally agreeing to meet at a neutral cafe. When he saw Julia, he almost didn't recognize her. The once radiant woman now looked haggard, her eyes dim. The platinum blonde hair had grown out dark roots, and her makeup was no longer immaculate. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," Julia said, her voice low. "I know I have no right to ask for your help." Mark nodded, waiting for her to continue. "Everything has collapsed," Julia said, tears in her eyes. "Daniel, he used me, just like he used everyone else. I've lost my job, lost my reputation, and now I'm about to lose my place to live." "What about Daniel?" Mark asked, his voice calm, showing no sympathy. "He left," Julia said with a bitter smile. "When the media storm came, he packed his bags and went to Berlin. Said it was more tolerant of artists there. Before leaving, he took the money from our joint account, saying it was his deserved payment." Mark silently looked at her, his face expressionless. He didn't want Julia to see his thoughts, whether sympathy or satisfaction. "I know you won't forgive me," Julia continued, her voice trembling. "I just wanted to say you were right. Daniel wasn't the person I imagined, and our artistic legend was just a scam. Do you have something specific you need my help with?" Mark asked directly, his voice cold. Julia seemed shocked by his calmness, but quickly adjusted. "I just wanted to ask if you know any lawyers. I need to deal with some legal issues. Daniel signed several contracts in my name before leaving, making me responsible." Mark gave her a business card. "This is my lawyer. She's very professional." Julia took the card, hesitated, and still asked that question. "Do you hate me?" Mark looked out the window, not immediately answering. He wanted to say no, but that wasn't the truth. He did hate. Hated her betrayal. hated that she chose deception over honest communication, hated that she discarded 10 years of marriage like worn clothes. But what was the point of expressing this hatred? Does it matter? He finally answered. We're over. Your choices are yours, and so are the consequences. I've moved on. I'm sorry for everything, Julia said softly, tears finally falling. Good luck, Julia, Mark said, standing up. He didn't accept her apology, nor did he offer any comfort. He calmly walked out of the cafe, without looking back. After leaving the cafe, Mark felt a strange feeling, not satisfaction, not relief, but a confirmation that he had indeed moved on. Julia's fate was no longer his responsibility or concern, and her remorse could no longer touch his heart. In the following months, Mark continued to focus on his work and life. His firm received an international project requiring him to survey in South America for several months. On the plane, he happened to see a news item. Daniel had been charged with fraud in Berlin for selling the same, limited edition, work to multiple collectors. He may face up to 5 years in prison, the news report stated. This once called emerging artist is now accused of involvement in multiple art fraud and contract fraud cases. Meanwhile, Mark's professional career reached new heights. His sustainable housing design gained international recognition, and he was invited to give tour lectures in multiple countries. At an architecture forum, he met Rachel, an architect from Canada, and they discovered they shared common design philosophies and values. Your work is authentic and has soul, Rachel told Mark during their exchange. Too many architects now pursue surface shock while neglecting the essence of architecture, serving people. They began to communicate regularly, sharing projects and ideas. Rachel's warm and sincere personality gradually helped Mark put aside his fear of intimate relationships. Their friendship naturally developed into a deeper feeling, but Mark maintained a cautious pace, not wanting to repeat past mistakes. I've experienced betrayal before, Mark confided to Rachel during a video call. It makes it hard for me to fully trust others again. Trust takes time, Rachel said understandingly. We can take it slow, building it step by step. As for Julia, it was said she had left Barcelona and returned to her hometown, a small city. The once glamorous art director now taught children to paint at a community arts center, far from the spotlight and bustle. She looks completely different, a friend who had visited that city told Mark. Her hair has returned to its natural color. She no longer wears heavy makeup, and her dress is simple and plain. But she still seems very lonely, rarely interacting with others. 3 years later, Mark's firm received an international architectural award for its innovation in social housing. The award ceremony was held in Barcelona, and many former friends and colleagues came to congratulate him. Rachel flew in from Canada to attend this important moment. They had already planned to begin a long-term collaboration in the near future, both professionally and personally. At the dinner, a friend mentioned Julia. Have you heard? She's become somewhat eccentric in that small city. They say she started painting strange pictures, always themed around betrayal and punishment. Locals think she's a bit abnormal. Children are even afraid to go to her classes. Mark just nodded, not saying much. He hadn't thought about Julia for a long time, and hearing this news now, he felt no schadenfreude, only recognizing that everyone pays for their choices. As for Daniel, he was eventually sentenced to imprisonment for multiple art fraud charges. According to reports, he emotionally collapsed in prison, claiming to be a victim of the art world. Ironically, some sketches he created in prison received good reviews from some critics for their genuine emotion and originality. Perhaps this is the first time he's truly faced himself, one critic wrote. The prison walls have instead released his talent, which had been bound by ambition. Mark walked on the streets of Barcelona, looking at this city he deeply loved. The pain from betrayal had become a thing of the past, but the lessons would forever be etched in his heart. He understood that true love isn't the burning of passion, but the adherence to commitment, not a momentary impulse, but a day-after-day choice. As night fell and the city lights came on one by one, Mark and Rachel stood hand in hand at the port, looking at the distant lighthouse. The shadows of the past had dissipated, and the possibilities of the future unfolded before them. He wasn't sure where this new relationship would lead, but he knew that whatever happened, he would choose honesty and respect, not deceit and betrayal. If this story resonates with you, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more wonderful content. Looking forward to seeing you in our next story.